A devastating scene.
I'm going to be grieving and hurting with this for the rest of my life.
A beautiful mother and her thriving young daughters dead.
Shocked. You couldn't believe it. You know, tears just started falling down my face.
They were found with gunshot wounds inside the mother's boyfriend's luxury home.
There's a lot at stake. The world, literally, the world is watching this case to see what we do with it. And it's important to me that we get it right.
But how long will it take to find out what really happened? And what type of evidence is now in the hands of investigators?
And it has been over a year now, but investigators refuse to close that case that involved the deaths of a mother and her two young daughters. A murder-suicide or a triple murder? Well, both theories are now being widely debated in a case that is getting national attention. And News 4 San Antonio's Ariana Labelli looked into the evidence, the families, and the new details of what's being investigated.
Before the crime scene tape, before the tragedy, their life seemed picture perfect. Nicole Olsen, a vivacious mother of three who worked as a hairdresser and jewelry business entrepreneur. The 37-year-old was seen in this promotional video doing what she loved.
Beautiful lady. You know, she's just stunning, very striking. But next to that is just her energy.
Her oldest daughter, 16-year-old Alexa Montez, a cheerleader and church volunteer. Alexa's dad, Carlos Montez, says she enjoyed puppet ministry and working with children.
She was a really, really awesome, caring, giving person. I've heard of people that said that she's given her lunch to them at school.
And 10-year-old London, vibrant, kind, and well-liked. She loved animals and singing. She was even considering auditioning for America's Got Talent. London's dad, Hector.
What do you miss most about London?
Everything. Literally everything. She was what fueled me, I guess, what, you know, kept me going.
Nicole also had a son, Skylar. He was in his early 20s, off living on his own. Nicole and the girls lived with her boyfriend, Charles Wheeler, inside of this gated subdivision in northwest Bexar County. A search into the 33-year-old shows a successful businessman with ties to the oil industry and rodeo, and some run-ins with the law. We found these jail booking photos for charges related to public intoxication and driving while drunk.
We met him once, and then outside of that, my family never talked to him. He never talked to us. He never reached out to us.
The girls' dads, Carlos and Hector, say even though their daughters were living in his home, he never made an attempt to be involved with them, and his distance seemed odd.
We look back now and we think about these things, and we say to ourselves, those should have been obvious signs to us that something wasn't right.
Just as a man, he never went up and introduced himself. You know, they're living in my house, you know, just as a common courtesy.
Even after the murders more than a year ago, Carlos says the man who lived with his daughter still hasn't reached out to his family.
We never got any phone calls and never got any flowers. No one ever reached out to us, and at that point it just kind of seemed more like, what is it that you're trying to avoid? Why are you trying to stay away so much?
Does that make you suspicious?
Yeah. I honestly ultimately think that he's 100% responsible for what happened that night.
But their suspicion conflicts with the medical examiner's report. The ME ruled Nicole's death a suicide and the girl's homicide.
I'm just not ready to say that Nicole murdered those little girls. I'm just not.
The ruling even has investigators torn.
I'm just not satisfied yet that we're ready to close that book.
Court records show 10 search warrants have been signed in this case. According to an affidavit to search AT&T and Sprint cell phone data, investigators say the crime scene was, quote, very complex, and that there was possible evidence, quote, the deaths were not necessarily a murder-suicide and possibly a triple murder.
What's the priority level of this case?
It's a high priority. It's a high priority. To me, we may reach the point where, you know what, it just looks like a suicide on her part. But again, to me, that it's a whole other leap to call her a murderer. I'm just not there yet. I'm not willing to make that leap without something more.
Nicole's supporters say the devoted mother would never hurt her children.
Absolutely refuse to believe that she could have had any hand in hurting her own daughters.
There's no way she could have done this, no matter what she was going through, no matter what she was facing.
Right now, the sheriff says there are no suspects.
Is Charles Wheeler still considered a person of interest?
I think everybody in this that's associated with Nicole and these little girls is still considered a person of interest.
We contacted the 3 attorneys representing Wheeler, asking them to be a part of the story. We haven't heard back. The sheriff cautions people not to take Wheeler's silence as guilt.
There's no secret that the family of this young man, you know, they've got some wealth. They've got a lot at stake, and so I can't blame them or infer any guilt based upon their action.
The sheriff says right now they have cell phone data, text messages, calls, and experts with the FBI combing through evidence.
We bought a piece of equipment specifically for this case.
When we come back, a brand new investigative tool being used in a vehicle possibly involved in this case. That's after the break.
Welcome back. We are continuing now our coverage of those 3 mysterious deaths. Now more than a year after a woman and her 2 daughters were found dead inside their Northwest Bexar County home. News 4 San Antonio's Ariana Labelli has more now on a new investigative tool purchased specifically for this case. More now of our special report, A Tainted Legacy.
I know that I'm going to be grieving and hurting with this for the rest of my life.
Over a year has gone by since Carlos's 16-year-old daughter and her 10-year-old sister were murdered.
We could be having a great time, and then in an instant we all stop and we realize that she's not there with us, and it hurts.
What happened, you know, because they don't tell us anything. They haven't told us much at all.
Although there haven't been many public updates, the sheriff says they are working actively with the FBI.
It's a time-consuming process. It's a painstaking process, and I certainly understand this family. They want that closure. And I want nothing more than to give them that closure.
The sheriff revealed a new piece of investigative equipment is helping them.
We bought a piece of equipment specifically for this case.
The device is called a Burla. It can access what's known as a vehicle's infotainment system.
It's your stereo, your GPS, all of your tracking information. It's the brain, I guess, so to speak, of your car.
He says it was a pricey purchase, but something investigators specifically requested in the Anaqua Springs case.
That system can actually tell us, to a certain extent on certain vehicles, you know, was there somebody in the passenger seat at the time? How much did they weigh? We were going northbound. The left-right passenger was not wearing a seatbelt. It tells us so much information about what's going on in that car at the time.
The Anaqua Springs home has now been sold. Property records show it was bought for $975,000 by a Conroe-based rental and lease company. The selling documents mention the deaths that occurred on January 10th. We found this video on Summit Hill Country website showing the lavish, well-decorated rustic home. A stark contrast to the scene 13 months earlier.
We're just praying that there's some sort of break in the case and that, you know, evidence will help guide us to what actually happened that night.
The painful memories of what could have happened inside haunt those who love the girls.
Everything was perfect when she was here, and now we just have to continue to live our lives and move on without her, and it just doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem fair.
Carlos finds comfort at Kingsborough Ridge Baptist Church, where he proudly watched little Alexa grow up.
Almost every Sunday I'm brought to tears because I'm standing right there with my family, and I look up on stage and I just imagine her up here singing one day.
But it makes him feel close to her.
Look, and it's almost like a part of us feels like Alexa's here.
On Alexa's birthday, the community released butterflies and planted this tree to honor her life. Here, he reflects on the moments they had together and those stolen from him.
I think the biggest things that hurt me the most are imagining her getting married someday and not being able to walk her down the aisle, and her graduating from high school and her going off to college. To know that I'll never have those days here it hurts a lot.
For a year, he says they held off burying Alexa in case there was any evidence needed from her body by investigators.
We finally decided as a family that it was time to move on.
Last month, Alexa was cremated. Some of her ashes were buried with her mom. Next year, Carlos says he will go to Hawaii, where he was stationed in the military when she was born, and spread the rest of her ashes.
That was a dream of mine, to always take her back to where she was born. I planned on doing it on her 18th birthday.
And while answers won't bring the victims back, he says it will help them go on and clear Nicole's name from the allegations now tainting her great legacy.
What would justice be?
Truth. To find out what happened.
While I never met any of these three young ladies during their lifetimes, I wish I had. You know, it's important to me that we get it right.
It's kind of scary to think about what really happened that night, but in the end, we want the truth to be told. We want the truth to come out.
Ariana Lubelli, News 4, San Antonio.